Yeah, thank you for joining us, everybody. And then to those that are watching it back afterwards, tonight we're really fortunate that we've got two endurance experts who are going to share some thoughts and some knowledge around working with para athletes or endurance athletes with a disability. Both Dean and Alasdair have got specialist areas within disability athletics and triathlon. And so Dean's going to talk through the cerebral palsy classes and the athletes with a learning disability, whilst Alasdair's going to talk more around limb impairments, upper body and lower body, and visually impaired as well. So Dean, as you may know, is a former Paralympian. Sorry, I shouldn't say former, should you? Once a Paralympian, always a Paralympian. And now coaches out of the University of Birmingham and the Talent Hub, as well as a number of programmes across England athletics and British athletics, and supports Paralympic teams for international competition. Alasdair is a former international athlete as well, a middle distance runner, coached with British athletics for a long time before moving over to para triathlon, and works with the para pathway and supports teams for British triathlon for international competition. So two really experienced coaches with you tonight to share a little bit of learning around working with endurance athletes who've got a disability. So I'm going to hand over to Dean first to kick off. And over to you, Dean.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, hi guys. Lovely to see people on the call this evening. So yeah, if we can just nip across to the next screen, I'm going to start talking around, I guess, hints and tips around endurance running for maybe athletes with cerebral palsy or those that have got brain injury. I guess when we're talking about CP or brain injury, we're looking at those individuals that have maybe suffered some kind of trauma to the brain, either at birth or in later life, which is affecting kind of motor skills and strength, as well as coordination. It can affect kind of all four limbs, maybe quadriplegic, and it can be one-sided body, hemiplegic, or even just lower limbs, so almost diplegic. But yeah, brain injury and CP kind of cover an array of kind of disability in a spectrum of impairment, really. So we're going to give you a little bit of a whistle-stop tour in terms of some hints and tips. And what I would say, and I'm sure Alasdair's going to say the same thing as he goes through on some of the topics, that actually a lot of things that we would do if we had an athlete come down to a club with whatever impairment it's pretty similar to what any coach would do with any athlete. It's kind of, I guess, working out what that athlete needs. But I guess there's a few more considerations to think about. So I guess some of the challenges with CP or brain injury, certainly impaired motor skills, coordination and balance. So something to really consider, particularly when we're doing drills, when we're warming up, those kinds of things. Decreased range of motion and tighten muscles, and sometimes some spasticity or tone in the muscles. Loss of strength in the affected areas of the body, and potentially the stronger areas of the body being overworked. Potentially decreasing sensation, which is particularly worth noting if an athlete's injured, and maybe how they perceive an injury and that kind of seriousness of the injury, whether they can kind of maybe feel it in the same way that a mainstream athlete would. It's worth noting that someone with a brain injury or cerebral palsy potentially have slowed speech, and also worth considering that in addition to having the disability, there may be other impairments there. We do often see people with CP also having visual impairments, kind of learning disabilities. But as I say, there's an absolute spectrum there, and like far too much to go through in terms of this evening, but hopefully that would give you a little bit of an overview. I guess what are the opportunities of kind of endurance running and endurance training with someone with a brain injury or CP? So the obvious one that I hope we kind of all know is improved fitness and strength. And I guess the thing that I kind of found in my own career as an athlete with CP myself, over the years of training, although my disability didn't necessarily improve, It's not a progressive disability CP as such. I was able to hold my disability much better, and the fact that I was stronger, and the fact that I'd kind of worked those areas and that weak left side, I was hemiplegic. It meant that I was certainly able to hold myself better in day-to-day life, as well as in running. So I guess it gives I guess it gives the kind of look to the outside world that my kind of disability was milder, certainly while I was a trained athlete, because day to day and within the sport, being highly trained and being fitter, it just minimised the way my disability affected me. I can certainly feel a difference as a retired coach now, a few years down the line. Other opportunities, certainly the social benefits of the club environment, and potentially a competition. The great thing with endurance is that we've got opportunities for competition on all surfaces, whether that be track, road, cross country. Certainly worth kind of considering surfaces with that individual and their potential gait and how they are, how they're kind of running. I know myself, I did run some cross country, but I certainly had to pick and choose those cross country courses that were potentially better underfoot and look at conditions on the day. I guess like any athlete, but even more so someone with CP. And it's also worth noting that from a performance side of things and looking more in kind of Paralympic sport, that as a CP or a brain injury athlete, there is a 1500 in the program, depending on your classes. So actually there's some real opportunity for some real performance competition as well, which is awesome. Can we grab the next slide, please, Paul? Yeah, so I kind of just tried to summarize a little bit, and it's quite embarrassing, Sarah, that you've put that image of me on that. I haven't seen that for a while, but some considerations for coaching someone if someone comes down to the club with CP and a brain injury. And as I said, a lot of these considerations are things that most of your training group would be considering anyway. I guess it's just worthwhile taking a little bit more note. So obviously kind of simplifying the drills and focusing on good mechanics are really, really imperative in my mind. If we can kind of minimize some of those traits that maybe the impairment brings on, so foot contact and potentially dragging a foot or a tightened arm carriage with less range, if we can slowly cue those to even improve them by 1 or 2%, then that is certainly going to be a good grounding and a base for us to build from there. I think sometimes as endurance runners, we get fixated on running mileage and running lots. And I think with a CP runner, certainly working from the bottom and seeing if you can improve those potentially different mechanics, shall we say. As I said there, again, strengthening before loading. So actually trying to get stronger in those areas, particularly for me, my left side is a little weaker. So actually focusing a little bit more on that left side and working that area before then going and doing the running and almost activating that area was always really, really useful. Considering the conditions for training. So CP athletes tend to like the heat more. Muscles tend to work a little bit more as opposed to cold. So actually thinking about whether it be weather conditions or whether just being a little bit more on it with layers, and particularly in the winter and colder times, if you can keep that person a lot warmer, they're going to perform much better, particularly with CP. And as I've already said, thinking about your surfaces. So quite often clubs, we need to be on the track quite often, particularly through the week in the evenings when they're light in the winter. But actually thinking about if we can mix that up where there's an opportunity to some soft surfaces, but also being aware of that person's gait and how that's going to affect them. I think, as I've mentioned, volume management is a big one. As endurance runners, as I said, we like to run lots, but actually picking and choosing when we do our best training and when we're at our best, whether that's having your club nights as your session days and then advising outside of that potentially some slower, easier running, or if not, some cross training, rather than throwing loads of volume at an athlete that maybe not strong enough to take that, which is certainly going to be the case with someone with potential weaknesses, motor weaknesses and strength weaknesses. It's going to leave us more open to injury. And I think that kind of leads into quality of training. Someone with CP, in the same way that anyone gets tired, if they get tired, their form is going to go even more so. So I think being able to manage that tiredness and preserve a quality of training for your key sessions, which something like cross training or reducing volume in comparison to others will normally help, staying fresh for those really key days, and it will definitely ward against the risk of injury. Footwear super key. So you tend to find someone with CP with a different running gait. I certainly wear shoes out quicker and running shoes. So if we work from our standard 500 miles of running before we change our footwear, I would say like an athlete that is an endurance runner with CP will certainly work through those shoes a lot quicker. Just because potentially how their foot will strike down and slap down differently, and it will wear at slightly different points. So actually making sure that we're kind of changing those shoes more regularly and probably staying out of spikes a little bit more. Being in spikes is going to throw us on our toes, our forefoot a little bit more. Certainly with some of those different gaits that we see in brain injury and CP athletes, staying in slightly more cushioned shoes is just an easy win, I think. And I think looking more at like someone with a brain injury that's maybe had it acquired later in life, has maybe spent some of their time in mainstream athletics or just without an injury or a disability, to then having a disability later in life. It's worth noting that it's going to take that person a little bit of time to work themselves out and learn their new disability. I've certainly found with some athletes, they're still learning after 1, 2, 3 years in terms of how they respond to training. And that's an ongoing process. Every disability is different, but certainly for someone that has acquired something and hasn't had that education from birth, it is going to take a little bit of time. And that kind of leads into kind of athlete voice, I guess. And I think what I mean by that is I've got it on both of my slides, I think, that speak to the athlete, see what they feel. They still know themselves better than anyone. So learning and getting to know them and seeing what they feel and what they think is too much and too little, like you would with any athlete, is super key with someone that has maybe got a few different things going on. Yeah, Paul, if you can jump on to the next slide. Fantastic. And I'm just giving a little bit of a case study of how someone in a club setting might train. So Ant is at Hearts Phoenix, similar to myself, is left side affected by injury. But yeah, he uses the club system and does his interval works with a club twice a week with his coach, and uses a weekend running group, a slightly different group on a Sunday. So actually he's training with people 3 times a week, doing key sessions, despite having a hemiplegic injury all down one side. Outside of that, though, his main focus is in gym sessions and strengthening and core work. So actually, he doesn't do too much running outside of those key sessions. In terms of when I was speaking to him around this, he says he's just able to get better quality in the sessions if he's not so fatigued. And actually, when he's tried to run a little bit more, when he's tried to run a little bit more volume as an endurance runner, he's usually found that he's broken down a little bit. So it's just a little tweak there, that he's still getting kind of 5-6 training days in a week, which is quite a bit. But actually, in terms of his running days, it tends to be 3 key running days. Occasionally throw a park run in there for a bit of endurance work and a bit of competition, a bit of enjoyment. But actually, a real focus on strength to kind of strengthen up those weak areas in that left side. He also mentioned, and this was key for me as an athlete, flexibility and actually keeping on top of that kind of tone. We're naturally going to tighten up more as CP athletes. Sometimes we have high tone anyway, so just being aware and knowing what that feels like for the athlete is super key. And then also uses regular physio, like once every couple of weeks is able to utilize physio just to keep on top of the injuries. But he's training within a club environment. Been very consistent with training. So I thought I'd just kind of share that with you. It's just a little bit of an idea.